Hi, everybody. Hi. So an issue I've been thinking about lately is assessment. In particular, I'm thinking of it from the ground-up version of how do I, as a classroom instructor, deal with handling the assessment, communication, and reporting features of a more method class in an effective way. And partly I'm doing it because I teach at a state institution, and I'm expecting it's coming slowly. I'm expecting more of a top-down pressure to show up eventually. Something in the form of the state requiring student learning outcomes and student outcomes assessment for every single class. And I'd like to sort of prepare to meet them halfway so it's not imposed, that I find something educationally meaningful first. And partly because I do believe that this will make for a better experience for my students. Okay, so here's the big question that I have, and I've basically structured my slides as a sequence of questions because that's what we're doing. So what are some effective ways to structure and conduct the assessment and reporting in an IBL class? In particular, I feel like I have a more method geometry class that runs really well, and I don't want to screw it up. Right? I don't want to poison the environment that my students are working in, which for now, thankfully, is going wonderfully, by sticking on some grading scheme that distorts the perspective the students will have. Okay, so first question, and you have to ask this and answer it for yourself if you have this kind of conversation at your campus. What's the context for the discussion? So the simple answers for me, I teach at the University of Northern Iowa. It's a comprehensive master's granting state university. We have about 13,000 students. We have a long history as an institution that prepares teachers, and the particular course I'm thinking about called Math 3600, Euclidean Geometry, the students are primarily pre-service teachers. And this is one of their, not necessarily the first, but it's one of their first experiences with truly axiomatic and rigorous argument making. So I just got tenure. I've been at UNI for 6 years, and I've been teaching this class this way for 5 years, and I do it almost every semester. I think I've offered this class 9 times already. Right? So I have some experience with this particular setup. Okay, so of course, the first thing is to figure out what do we need to actually assess, and in what way are we going to share this with the students. So A, I actually hadn't thought about carefully enough until about 1.5 years ago, and B is what I'm still working on. So my current answers are, most of what I really want to assess are process goals. I really don't care too much which theorems from planar Euclidean geometry my students remember, well, next week. The time window for that is really short. But I care much more deeply about their affect for the subject and for their understanding of how the axiomatic method works, and I'm sure this all sounds familiar to you guys. Yeah, Mike Starbird's nodding back there because I've heard him make this point over and over and over again, and yeah, you're totally right, I agree with you. Okay, so what I'm working on at the moment to affect the communication structure is something I'm borrowing from a bunch of K-12 teachers. And in fact, this happens really most comfortably at elementary school. And I've talked to a lot of secondary school teachers who are working on this kind of thing lately. They call it standards-based assessment and reporting. Standards-based assessment and reporting. So some people call it standards-based grading. So if you haven't heard, the SBG or SBAR are the acronyms they use. And this is, what does that mean? Well, it means, first of all, that I treat it as a communications method. You basically, up front, tell the students what it is you expect them to learn. And in my case, it's a set of process goals. There are very few content things on there at all, right? You tell them up front what is it you expect them to learn, and you explicitly tie assessment opportunities to those particular outcomes, and you're supposed to tell the students, you get a C if you can master these, and you get a B if you can master these. That's the kind of scheme that often gets used. Question 3, how can you communicate effectively with each member of the class about his or her progress? Now, I'm finding this more challenging because my class sizes are growing. When I have 15 students, it's not so bad. We can all stay in contact, but I find by the time you get to 25 students, it's harder to stay on top of every single person, every single meeting. And I'm not doing it effectively, so I need some sort of structure for helping me do that. I'll share with you these are what my pieces are so far. I have a letter to the students explaining to them what's going on. And I've actually chosen to be quite explicit and to share my motivation and some of my thought process in arriving at what I'm doing because my students are pre-service teachers. I've pulled the curtain back to let them in on the discussion a little bit. And I have a very public list of standards, which, if you're curious, I'd be willing to share with you at some point, okay? I have a very public list of standards, and I hand that out to them as soon as we actually start discussing grades, which, by the way, is not the first day of class. It's just whenever somebody gets around to asking, usually sometime in the second week of class. Yeah. Okay. Now, that's the first tier of things that are new and explicit. The second bit, I'm sure those of you who have experience with IBL teaching, you already are doing these, right? Regular in-class feedback on presentations. What you say, what their classmates say, they get regular feedback on the quality of their work. And on written work, of course, they get some version of a referee report, right? You tell them, okay, I'm confused here. They get feedback on what's going on. But that's very traditional and explicit. What I'm missing, and I'm not sure I want them actually, but what I'm missing are clear statements about current grades all the time. Now, it's not hard, right? If you've been teaching this way for a while, you get to the point halfway through a semester, you know how your students are doing. When they ask you, you can have a 5-minute conversation with them. But it's not the same as, regular unit tests where they know I've gotten 3 A's and a B. And so you have to be careful about this to help manage their expectations and their workload and their effort. And I'm also missing explicit ties between the assessment events and the changes in my formal summative assessment. Yeah, you gave a really good presentation today, your grade is now an A. Like, I've never said that in class. I can't imagine saying that in class. But at some point, I need to let the students know when they've improved. And so here's my big confounding question. When I first started teaching with inquiry-based methods, I found this actually to be the most awesome thing imaginable. Formative assessment and summative assessment is completely scrambled. Completely scrambled, right? When my colleagues ask me, when do you do assessment? The easy answer is, all the time. Right? There was a student at the board, and there's students participating back here, I'm doing assessment. But it's usually more formative than summative. And at some point, though, you've accumulated enough understanding of what your students know and what they can do that you feel like you can just assign a grade. Well, that's great, and I managed to get tenure and have enough trust for my students going that way. But there's not a whole lot of cover if somewhere were really to complain. I wonder about that, and I'm worried about it a little bit. So I'm trying to figure out where it might be. Where it might be. So that's just a tiny little bit of where I'm coming from. And at this point, I'm sure I'm way early because I'm nervous and I'm speaking very fast. Exactly. So I am happy to entertain questions and discussion at this point. And I've separated them like into foundational and advanced proficiencies, right? And this is my way of signaling to the students that if you want to get a C in the class, right? So Ed was talking about this a minute ago. He had some sort of base level that he wanted all the students to get to. And these are the foundational proficiencies. Like if you want to pass this class, you have to show me that you can do this kind of stuff. And if you want a better grade, well, you have to start dipping into this other list over here. And I called those advanced proficiencies. I was trying to find as polite language as I could for those. Yeah, so here, these are the ones about investigative process, right? Explore examples, make appropriate choice and use of technology in investigation. It's a Euclidean geometry class. Sometimes it's appropriate to go poking around with GeoGebra, right? Perseverance, yeah, looking for structure, okay. Here. A big part of my class is about definitions, right? That's how I choose to frame the conversation. So, like, can you use a definition properly to justify an assertion? That's a very foundational thing. Later on, of course, in the class, there's many opportunities I don't give them definitions for words like convex. One of the problems on my sequence is to define what do you mean by a convex polygon. Yeah, a student who can do that successfully has really shown something, right? So that's one of those, I'm giving you a much better grade. And so this goes on quite a bit. Actually, to a certain extent, they feel very narrow, and like there are too many of them to actually keep track of during one semester. That's a problem I've had. Did I answer your question, Michael?
Go back and let me see some more of
Okay. Here we go. So advanced proficiencies here. This is in written communication. Write concisely, balancing clarity and brevity. Critique written mathematics in a peer review setting. I keep a class journal, right? And so they have an opportunity to be a referee sometimes. Here. For oral presentations, make effective use of presentation technology or engage in meaningful critique, right? This is an opportunity for students who ask really good questions to, what I got here? Nothing for content. It's a Euclidean geometry class. That's the list I care least about. Here, make a clear definition or prove a really difficult theorem, right? If you do something creative, you do something hard that required, I know that took you 2 weeks and you tried 10 ideas, right? Yeah. Those kinds of things. Yeah, and others. Yes, please, with the sunglasses on your head. I don't know.
Hi, Amy Kassir, United States Naval Academy. I was wondering, I've heard this from many people, is like, oh, well, by the end of the semester, you know your students really well, you know what grade to give them.
Yeah.
I don't.
Okay.
I mean, I do know my students really well. I've done lots and lots of formative assessment, but how to balance out, well, this student's really good at this thing, and this other student's really good at this thing, but terrible at this other thing, and what, is that a C? Is that a B? What's the difference between a B and a C?
Fair enough. I have a comment to make, but nowhere near an answer. Okay? So first of all, it's easy to tell which students are doing A work. Yeah? And like Ed suggested, I'm generous. Yeah? But it's easy to tell which students. I feel comfortable. Decisions at the ends are not the hard ones, right? A student who got an F in my class really earned it by not participating. Yeah? A student who got an A in my class did something awesome. What's harder, and I'm having conversations with some of my colleagues right now, what's harder is deciding for those students, I'm not exactly sure if they need a C. I struggle with this. A student who manages to participate, every once in a while, like they give 4 or 5 presentations over a semester, and their exam looks okay. Am I really sure? I'm not. I struggle with that too. I don't know, anybody else got a good idea for that?
So you said that you have this list of standards.
Yes.
And that you have a list of assessments that match the standards. And my question is, what are the assessments you have that match these standards? And how do you come up with IBL appropriate assessments that match the standards?
Okay, good. If I said it the way you just characterized it, then I misspoke. Perhaps you misunderstood me or I said the wrong thing. I wish that I had a way to formally tie each assessment to standards. I wish. The people who I'm cribbing from, the secondary educators that I know that are doing this kind of thing to restructure their classrooms, for many of the secondary educators I met, this is the way that they're finding an active and engaged classroom, is by rethinking what they do, and this is an entry point for them. Yeah. It's not my entry point, it's something I'm coming to later. But they do formally, like they hand out a quiz, and on that is, here are the things I'm assessing you on today. And when they correct the quiz or whatever, they also then go through and make little check marks. You've demonstrated these, and you haven't demonstrated those, and that's what they keep track of as a grade book. I don't have that system. My class runs as a pretty lightly modified Moore method class. And so assessment opportunities are, you went to the board today and gave a presentation, and if it was successful, you wrote a paper and tried to get it published in the class journal, right? That's that two-pronged kind of assessment. And then, I run a midterm just as a check, and I run a final exam just as a check.
So what you were saying about the giving them the list of standards and that you want them to meet ahead of time, I've had students request this from me, and I push back a little bit because I don't want to have to tell them that I want them to use definitions.
Yeah.
I want them to know to use definitions. Once I put it there, it's no longer, it's no longer something that they're having to evaluate the need for. So do you have a way of addressing, do you see downsides to handing them the standards when you want them to sort of internalize them?
Yes.
Okay.
I do see the downside to that. It becomes readily clear through the sequence that I've given that, definitions, I jump up and down about definitions, right? So that particular example is not a surprise to anyone. But I see where you're coming from. I hadn't particularly thought about it that way before, and now I will.
Do you give these at the beginning of the class or just in the...
This?
Yeah.
So when the students finally ask me for a syllabus, I give them this kind of stuff.
So they will have had some kind of experience.
Yeah, usually, like I said previously, it's about 2 weeks in, usually when they finally get so fed up. I've had classes ask later, but yeah. By the end of the first day is all math all the time, and I hand them new problems to do, and I say, I'll see you next time, right? And yeah. So this comes up later, after we've started to establish a working habit, but it's not yet. It usually comes up before we hit that sweet zone where I don't have to tell them what we're doing anymore. So there is that potential for interfering. Your point is well taken. Are there any other questions or comments? Yes. I would be happy to share this document with anyone. Yeah. I tried to do that clearly. Okay. Thank you very much.